After months of will he or won't he, Joe Biden is now officially out. He's not going to be running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency, despite many rumors that he was gearing up fundraising-wise, gathering some potential endorsements. Turns out not the case. Here he is speaking with the president.
As my family and I have worked through the grieving process, I've said all along what I've said time and again to others, that it may very well be that that process, by the time we get through it, closes the window on mounting a realistic campaign for president, that it might close. I've concluded it has closed. Unfortunately, I believe we're out of time, the time necessary to mount a winning campaign for the nomination. But while I will not be a candidate, I will not be silent.
So there you have it. He's not going to be running, but he will be being involved in the election, speaking out on certain issues. Now, we got, shortly after that, a preview of some of the issues he's going to be talking about. But before we get to the other parts of his remarks, what is your immediate reaction to Biden dropping out?
I think timing's interesting. I think he's probably about the last possible moment that he could make this announcement and it not seem as though it was linked to the Benghazi hearings or anything else that came on the back of what Hillary may or may not face as a result of that. So I think his timing was kind of like now or never. I think it's also interesting because I think it avoids that conflict. Listen, he had a lot of support. There was a groundswell of support. He's incredibly popular with Democrats. He's at 75% approval rating. He's the hugger, right? He's the hugger and he's the carer and the sharer.
He's got the gaps, people like it.
Right, but it all changes as soon as you actually put your. It's one thing to kind of speculate, but it all changes very, very dramatically once you actually announce.
Yes,
and I think he was sensing that the opinion polls were not necessarily favourable or sufficiently favourable for him. But I think from the Democrats' point of view, I think it avoids that awkward civil war that he was hinting at. And you mentioned at the top there that he's been sort of making some soundings and some rumblings.
Talking to some unions.
Well, also, he'd also be those comments that he'd made about Hillary's, her role in the whole takedown of bin Laden and who advised and whether she had been on the fence. And so
if he had actually supported it.
Correct. So I get a sense that there's probably some sighs of relief amongst the staffers that he's actually not going to be involved.
So I guess the question is always, there's always the speculation of what a politician was thinking before he was going to run or not run, and then when they make the decision, or when they say, I'm going to go home and spend time with my family, we always know that it means none of that, because they're not going home and spending any time with their family. So, I mean, I was one of those guys that was a Biden supporter before Obama stepped into the spotlight back in 2008. I was like, oh, I'm a Joe Biden guy, because I liked how real he was. So even though I believe a lot of things he says is real and valid and he's straightforward with people, I still had to speculate. I said, when did he actually decide this? Was it really yesterday? Was he waiting for the first debate to be over and be like, I wonder how everyone's gonna fare and what they're gonna say to see where I can find my niche, where I fit in this race? And maybe after he didn't see that, or maybe he really is still grieving, or they just got over the grieving of their son, and then this is not a good time because it's so late and he can't really catch up, especially with the fundraising part, which he could. But I didn't come up with an answer yet of exactly how that panned out.
Yeah, as you all say, Joe Biden, very popular. I think most people a lot of Republicans even like him. But to me, he's always seemed, I mean, he's run for the presidency before. He's served as vice president. So he is certainly an ambitious guy. But he doesn't strike me to have the same sort of passionate ambition that perhaps he had when he was younger or that other Democrats have currently. He doesn't seem like a guy who desperately needs to be president.
Right.
And it is simply so difficult to get through the primary, let alone the general election, to raise the money, to make the sorts of promises and commitments that you have to get that far, that if you don't have 100, as he says, 110% to get into it, then I never really saw him running. And even if he did, he doesn't have a set of core driving issues of the sort that like Bernie Sanders has, or even Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton doesn't even need it to the same extent that he does, because she can rely on the fact that people are very familiar with her from her time in the White House previously, from her time as a senator. Joe Biden is a easy getting along kind of guy. He's fairly moderate, but I mean, how many how many of the people who he polls very well with of the Democrats could list 10 of his his policy stances?
He's a mediator for sure, and he's a placater, and that that kind of need for coalition and building foreign policy, that desire to stretch across the aisle. And he called, again, just going back to it, he called Hillary out for naming the Republicans as, quote, the enemy, whereas he saw them as the opposition, not the enemy.
Yeah. So why don't we actually talk about that, because we have that quote here. So he had previously said something like this several days ago. He said it again in the remarks after the video that you saw previously. He said, "I believe that we have to end the divisive partisan politics that is ripping this country apart. I don't believe, like some do, that it's naive to talk to Republicans. I don't think we should look at Republicans as our enemies. They are our opposition. They're not our enemies. And for the sake of the country, we have to work together." It's possible if that was a Barack Obama speech that he was reading right there, because it sounds strikingly like the president. And I think that a lot of regular people like to hear that sort of thing, because they wish we could go back to a time before the endless bickering and attacks and lack of any real action in Washington. But I don't necessarily think that the Democratic primary audience wants to hear that, because we've gotten that from Barack Obama.
As you said, it sounds a lot like Obama. But it's one of the problems that Obama had, was not accepting the fact that, okay, everyone loves those words. For the sake of the country, we have to work together. But working together requires another party, and not necessarily, I'm not saying political party, but in this case it is, but the other half to work with you. You can't continue to try to work with someone and then they refuse. Everything that you give, or everything that you even say you have a stance on, it turns into, you're trying to destroy the country. You're evil. We hate you. Why would you do this to the country? You know what you're doing?
And we even do that to the other side.
Fighting. Yeah, it's always fighting. And then even when you're going to legislate, in the few moments when Republicans do decide to work with someone, it's the reason why John Boehner's getting run out. Because one time he said, okay, you know what we shouldn't do? We shouldn't continue to shut down governments. We shouldn't continue to stop, to limit any raising of debt ceiling. Let's actually do something to legislate. And they said, that's not Republican way. How could you do this to us?
Well, they're right. It's not the current Republican way.
So I mean, it's a utopia that doesn't exist right now in our Congress.
It is curious, though, that you've got a sitting vice president eligible to run, and he isn't going to run. You said he had two. He had two fairly disastrous attempts previously in '88 and '08, right, where he kind of it ended early, pretty calamitously and fairly ignominiously for him. But notwithstanding that, it is kind of unusual, is it not?
To not run,
To not run and being a sitting VP.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's the ambitious thing. It's possible. It's a political calculus that he honestly thought his chances were too low, either looking at the polls or behind the scenes talking to the people with the money. After all, he would have begun the race with $0 in the bank compared to $77 million for Hillary Clinton, which you pointed out, he can raise a lot of money. I'm sure that he could. Can he match Hillary Clinton? That I'm not so sure of. So to open up a campaign for months more of attacking each other, President Obama would have then been basically forced to support Biden, which would have hurt Hillary as well.
Right.
That's a rough situation.
One of the presidents said something like, don't put me in this position, man.
You son of a bitch, you better get out. Now, Hillary Clinton, a very classy response. She tweeted, "VP is a good friend and a great man. Today and always inspired by his optimism and commitment to change the world for the better." There's no cause for a nicer tweet than a political opponent dropping out of a race. They're always really nice. Donald Trump is always nice to the Republicans to drop out.
He was nice too. He said he would rather run against Hillary because she's got a worse record. So that's a backhanded compliment.
That was. He said he has a slightly better, less disastrous record. And by the way, Bernie Sanders also said Joe Biden's a good friend. He praised his lifetime of public service and for all that he's done for the nation.
You forgot the last, I think the graphics had a problem on Hillary Clinton's tweet. It ended with hashtag.
It would have done a little bit of damage to her. I think that in the end, I think she would have ended up being fine. And so I think that Biden, I think that he helps, whatever the legacy is that he wants to have coming out of his time. I mean, he's been in politics for 4 decades. Sure. I think that he has a good reputation. He did good work on the East Coast, and then eventually the White House. I think that this is the right move for him.